How to fix your documentation problems. Companies struggle with documentation. In most enterprise companies, it's something middle and senior management say they need, but from a prioritization perspective, it gets no time or expertise. Documentation ends up being something that is hastily slapped together at the last minute, so we can claim we documented it. Yet, few companies look at the documentation they put together and can say they're proud of it. The same companies who struggle with documentation are also looking at Agile as a way to make their project delivery better. Most of the information about documentation in an Agile context is sparse and unhelpful. As a result, confused companies wrestle with what to do to solve their documentation problem and continue down their path to agility. What we assume to be documentation problems are in fact communication and understanding problems. In this article, I'm going to outline some ways to fix these root causes by looking at re-examining the problem and pursuing two primary goals: creating a shared understanding and communicating a shared understanding. I was working with a company a few years ago who kept asking about documentation, so I wanted to find the root cause of this issue. I asked them, "What do you do today?" They proceeded to tell me about the MRD, the PRD, the project charter, the test scripts, the test results, the architecture diagram, and all the other artifacts they put together. Remind you, this company was not operating in a regulated industry. After we laid out all the documentation they needed, I began to ask one by one, who is the customer of this document? About half of the documents had no known customer. So of course I asked the question, if no one is reading these documents and no one wants these documents, why are we creating them? Because we need them, they exclaimed. So I asked the question, to whom is this documentation providing value? If we don't know who the customer is and no one is reading them, it appears they have no value and you do not, in fact, need them. As far as the other half of the documents that actually had customers, we went around and did some basic customer development. Each stakeholder group we would ask, what specifically do you need to know from this document, and how can we better help you with the information you need? We ended up collapsing over 40 pages of various documentation into about 5 pages with a few simple yet powerful techniques. Create what customers need, and create only what is valuable. Companies struggle with documentation because they think they need it. Most of the time, the documentation processes are from another era, created to fulfill different needs. So we end up with the burden of creating documents long after the documents have lived their useful lives. Additionally, there are never enough people helping with the documentation effort to make it sustainable. Sure, every once in a while when there is a change of leadership or a process audit, we get all hands on deck to create or update documents. But after the storm is past, things go back to normal, and the bloated documents that provide no value are rotting in SharePoint or on some network share drive once again. The root cause of this is that documentation is not seen as a first-class deliverable. Another way to say this is to say that documentation only gets attention after everything else. After requirements, after coding, after testing, after everything else we do, we look at documentation. Few projects have enough time, money, and people. The window of time for documentation always gets compressed near the end and never gets done. How enterprises perceive Agile creates confusion. As a result, you have a lot of companies who think Agile equals no documentation. One of the first questions I get is, Agile says no documentation. How do we document things? This turns into a 15-minute lecture about pull and value and dispelling the myth that Agile equals no documentation. Which brings me to the premise of this article. What is the real problem we are trying to solve? We are trying to solve a communication problem. We want to spread and transfer knowledge as effectively as possible. We're trying to solve an understanding problem. We want to ensure that the understanding is consistent from one person to the next, that they are all reading from the same sheet of music, as it were. When we examine documentation from the perspective of communication and understanding, we can now think of better ways to solve these problems. We can think of solutions other than pages and pages of hand-created documentation. Streamline and figure out what you really need to create. This starts by understanding who the audience is for a document and what the audience wants from the document. You find that out by asking. Avoid creating single overloaded documents to serve everybody. Instead, Create single-purpose documents to serve a single audience. This helps you to be able to update and change documents as needs change and as processes change. Make documentation a cross-functional responsibility. When documentation is only the responsibility of an unlucky few, you will not be successful in creating and updating high-quality documents. In the case of having people pair together, have one person write code while the other person documents. Use tools to automate documentation. Automated documentation that gets created with each build is much more likely to stay updated. Use tools like JavaDocs, Doxygen, and Swagger to automate creation of timestamped documentation. This is controlled and can stand up to an audit. Another overlooked technique for creating and sharing understanding is video. In 2014, video is fast and easy to create. It provides a much richer communication channel than written documentation. A 5-minute explained video can take the place of a 10-page document. It's much more likely that people will watch it. It's easy to change and update, and it is easily shared. Use screencasts and explainer videos to remove some of the burden of documentation.